The noise never stops in New York. It pulses through the veins of the city like electricity, horns wailing in the distance, subway brakes screeching against steel, the endless churn of footsteps on concrete. On the surface, it's just another Monday morning. But beneath it all, something deeper stirs. Something restless, quiet, aching to be heard. Alina sat alone on a park bench in Central Park, the cool breeze brushing fallen leaves against her boots. She wore success well, structured blazer, sleek laptop bag, a coffee cup held with the quiet authority of someone used to making decisions. Yet her eyes, they betrayed her. They were searching for something, not in the trees or the faces passing by, but in a space no one else could see. She was tired. Not from work, not from a lack of sleep. This was a different kind of exhaustion, one that didn't show up in blood tests or respond to 8 hours under a duvet. It was the slow burn of a soul running on empty, the kind of fatigue that creeps in when you've been living the right life, for all the wrong reasons. She wasn't lost. She knew exactly where she was. She just couldn't feel herself in it anymore. And then, as if plucked from another layer of reality, a voice cut through the fog. You look like someone trying to light a fire with wet wood. She turned. An elderly man had taken the seat beside her. His coat was old, but elegant, deep gray and lined with a trim that shimmered faintly in the light. His eyes were warm, but sharp, the kind of sharp that sees through time and pretenses. Alina gave a half laugh, polite but guarded. "Is that your poetic way of saying I look tired?" The man chuckled, a low, steady sound. "Not tired, starved. There's a difference. You're burning fuel, but it's not feeding you. You're running on the fumes of obligation." Something in his words stung, but not like an insult. More like truth knocking on a locked door inside her chest. "I'm sorry," she said. "Do we know each other?" "Not yet," he replied. "But I know that look. I've worn it. It's the look of someone who's done everything right and still feels like something is missing." Alina felt her throat tighten. He leaned forward, hands clasped. "Let me ask you something. Do you know where your energy goes?" She blinked. The question felt strange, but not unfamiliar. Like an echo from a dream she hadn't remembered having. "No," she said slowly. "I've never really thought about it." "That," he said, tapping a finger to his temple, "is the problem. Not just for you. For most people. You've been taught to focus on time, money, deadlines, data, but never your energy. And that's the only thing that shapes your life." There was something hypnotic about the way he spoke. Not in a mystical sense, but in a knowing. His words were precise, yet heavy with layers. Alina found herself leaning in. "Let me guess," he continued. "You wake up already behind. You check your phone before your eyes fully open. You scroll through news, notifications, maybe a few smiles, and then a wave of anxiety you can't quite name. You rush, you plan, you perform. And when the day ends, even if everything goes well, you feel disconnected, like something's off." Alina said nothing, but her silence screamed confirmation. He nodded. "You don't lack purpose," he said. "You lack power. Not the kind the world talks about, not the kind you can hold in your hands. I'm talking about your life force, your energy. It's leaking out of you faster than you can refill it." And in that moment, it felt like time stood still. It was as if he had reached into her and held up a mirror that reflected something she didn't want to admit. That the success she'd fought so hard to build was now a gilded cage. That her constant exhaustion wasn't from doing too much, but from giving herself away in tiny, invisible pieces every single day. She looked down at her coffee, the steam already fading. "So what am I supposed to do?" she whispered. He stood slowly, placing something beside her on the bench, a small, leather-bound journal. On its cover was a strange looping symbol, like an infinity sign wrapped in flame. "You start here," he said. "One question a day. No right answers, just truth. And in 7 days, if you listen closely, you'll hear it. The part of you that remembers who you were before the world taught you to forget." She opened the journal to the first page. There, written in firm ink, "Where is your energy going, and who decided that?" She looked up, but the man, Nico, she would later learn, was already walking away. He didn't turn back. He didn't have to. The question followed her home like a shadow with weight. That night, Alina didn't open her laptop. She didn't respond to emails. She didn't scroll. For the first time in months, she turned off the lights, lit a single candle, and sat in the silence of her own company. And slowly, almost hesitantly, she began to write. "My energy goes into overthinking, into pleasing, into trying to control what's never really been mine to control. I give it to fear, disguised as productivity. I give it to noise, to urgency, to the need to feel valuable by always being busy. But I never once asked, is this mine, or did someone else teach me this was the way?" Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition. It was like her soul had been waiting for her to pause, just long enough to hear the whisper beneath the noise. And now, she heard it loud and clear. In the stillness, a new kind of fire sparked, not one of ambition, but of returning. A knock at her door broke the silence. When she opened it, no one was there, only a folded card on the floor. In that same handwriting, "Are you ready to remember?" Below it, the words, "Meet me tomorrow. We begin." She didn't know what she was stepping into, but deep inside, something ancient and unshakable answered, "Yes, I'm ready." If this message stirs something in you, if it feels like a mirror you didn't know you needed, subscribe to this channel now. It's how we know these words matter. It's how we stay lit together. Because this is only the beginning. Have you ever felt like your mind is a place you don't fully belong in? Like you're awake, you're thinking, you're functioning, but beneath it all, there's a room you've never entered. A room where your true thoughts live, untouched by conditioning, unfiltered by habit, and terrifying in their honesty. Most people never walk into that room. They hover near the doorway their entire lives, distracted by noise, numbed by routine, paralyzed by the belief that the door doesn't exist. But what if it does? What if you've passed it 100 times in your mind and never knocked? What if the reason you keep chasing peace is because you've never truly directed your attention with purpose? Alina didn't know what she was walking into that morning. She had returned to the park where she met the man who'd given her the strange journal and the even stranger question. Where is your energy going, and who decided that? She hadn't stopped thinking about it since. Something in her life had shifted, not in the physical world, but inside her awareness. Like the air itself had texture now. Like time wasn't just passing, it was revealing. She found him seated beneath the same tree, a folded paper in his hand. No words, just a gesture for her to sit, and a slip of paper passed into her palm. It read, "Fushimi Inari, Kyoto." "Is this where I'm going?" she asked, eyebrows raised. Nico gave a half smile. "Not your body, your mind." She paused. You want me to imagine Japan? I want you to walk the path of your attention. The gates there, those long red corridors winding into the mountains. They're not just wood and paint, they're symbols. And today you're going to step through them, one by one. She stared at him, searching his face for explanation. What do you mean? She asked. He closed his eyes, breathed in deeply, and said, Close yours, and I'll show you. She did, and what unfolded was not a visualization. It was a visitation. In the darkness of her mind, the image formed. A mountain path, rising in soft mist, flanked by hundreds of glowing red torii gates. Each one pulsed slightly, as if alive, waiting. She could almost hear the silence between the trees, the sacred hush of intention itself. This is your mind, Nico's voice echoed gently. This is where you live, whether you know it or not. Alina took a step forward in the vision, the gravel crunching under her feet. Each gate bore a word etched into its surface. One said fear, the next doubt, another urgency, shame, overthinking. She hesitated. These are the gates you walk through each day, he said, without even noticing. You pass through fear the moment you open your phone. You pass through shame when you say yes but mean no. You walk through anxiety every time you trade silence for endless stimulation. Alina felt her chest tighten. How do I stop it? She asked. You don't stop. You choose. You walk different gates. And then something changed. The path before her shifted. New gates appeared, still glowing red, but the words had changed. Stillness, clarity, joy, gratitude, courage. She stepped closer and could feel it in her body, a warmth rising, her breath slowing, her awareness sharpening like the world itself was turning vivid. These are not fantasies, Nico said. They are frequencies. What you pay attention to, you feed. What you feed becomes real. The image began to fade, but its impact lingered. She opened her eyes slowly, her heart thudding, not from fear, but from truth, from recognition. The same way you recognize your face in the mirror after forgetting what you looked like. Back in the park, the trees no longer looked ordinary. They shimmered slightly, like the air around her had changed density. It hadn't. She had. And now, the real work could begin. That afternoon, Nico gave her a task. Every morning, he said, before the world gets its hands on your attention, you will choose 5 gates. Not goals, not tasks, gates. You will visualize walking through them, one by one, breathing into each intention. Alina asked, what kinds of gates? Any that restore you. Peace, confidence, focus, self-trust. It doesn't matter what you name them, only that you mean them. It felt strange at first, too simple, too quiet. But on the second day, she noticed something. She didn't check her phone before breathing. She didn't rush to respond to a passive-aggressive email. She didn't over-apologize in a meeting where she once would have. It wasn't that the world had changed. It was that her attention was no longer up for grabs. The gates worked. Every morning, she'd close her eyes, step through her chosen 5. Presence, truth, joy, power, grace. And by the time her feet hit the subway stairs, her energy was hers. The more she practiced, the clearer it became. Her energy wasn't leaking anymore. It wasn't scattered. It was aligned. At night, she added a new practice to her journal, the gate audit. She'd reflect on which gates she walked through unintentionally, jealousy, resentment, comparison, and ask, where did I permit for this? Sometimes the answer was subtle, an article that triggered insecurity, a conversation where she didn't speak her truth. a moment where she prioritized being liked over being real. But she never judged it. She just wrote, "Tomorrow, I will choose again." And she did. One evening, after a week of this practice, she sat in front of a blank canvas and began to paint. She hadn't touched a brush in years, but now the gates wanted form. She painted 5 tall arches, each one radiating a different color, a different feeling. At the top of each, she inscribed a single word: trust, freedom, stillness, fire, vision. When she finished, she didn't feel proud. She felt home. A part of her that had been silent since childhood now sang. And the next morning, when she chose her gates, she didn't have to imagine them. She just remembered them, because they were already inside her. And maybe they always had been. If something in you stirred while listening to this, if you felt a gate in your mind begin to crack open, subscribe to the channel now. It's how we continue this journey together, and how we keep building spaces for clarity, courage, and the return of your true energy. This is only the second step, but it's the one that changes the direction of everything. Let me know when you're ready for part 3, and I'll make sure the tone and rhythm build seamlessly from here. Ban Jan Noi. Rewrite this part too, the gates of intention, with more emotional depth and insight. Make the writing coherent and emotionally engaging. Write it as a continuous narrative. Do not break it into sections or use any icons. Write in American English with a total of 1,500 words. Ensure sufficient word count. Ensure sufficient word count. Do not repeat content from previous parts. Instead, follow the structure of outline A to ensure the content accurately reflects this part. Make sure character names are consistent with the earlier sections, so that once all parts are completed, the story forms a unified and cohesive piece. Do not write in canvas mode. Keep the canvas turned off. This content is used 11 Lab software for audio reading. Please standardize issues such as reading rhythm, tone, and accents to suit this software, and ensure a seamless rhythm with all subsequent sections to ensure consistency across the entire content. ChatGPT Jan, certainly. Below is the rewritten part 2, the gates of intention, crafted with emotional depth, psychological insight, and narrative fluidity, while adhering closely to the structure of outline A. This version ensures consistency with earlier parts, uses American English, and maintains a natural rhythm for audio narration with 11 loops. Word count is carefully balanced around 1,500 words. The second day began not with noise, but with stillness. Melina hadn't heard from Nico all night, but she sensed something was coming. She could feel it, not in the air or the sky, but in the quiet way, breath. Something had begun to shift. She was starting to notice things she hadn't before. How much her fingers trembled when she reached for the phone, how tension hid in her shoulders, how the silence she once feared now felt oddly comforting. She returned to the park, unsure if Nico would be there. The morning light filtered through bare branches like it had something sacred to say. When she arrived at the familiar bench, he was waiting, not with words this time, but with something folded in his hand. He handed it to her without explanation. A piece of parchment, thin and weathered, with a single word written in dark ink. Kyoto. She looked up at him, puzzled. Are you sending me somewhere? In a way, he said, but you won't need a plane. She smiled nervously. All right. What now? He nodded slowly, gesturing for her to sit. Close your eyes. I'll guide you. What you're about to see is a place of intention, not imagination. She hesitated, then allowed her eyelids to fall shut. She exhaled. The ground beneath her felt strangely solid, the cold air sharp with clarity. His voice, low and steady, began to shape the space around her mind. "Picture yourself standing at the foot of a mountain path," he said. "Tall trees stretch above, the sky veiled in soft mist. Ahead of you, a trail begins, not made of stone, but of gateways. Red torii gates, endless and glowing gently, stretching up toward the summit. And then, like breath-meeting flame, the image came alive. She saw it, a sacred mountain trail somewhere deep in Kyoto, Japan. The torii gates stood in elegant rows, stretching far into the distance. But these gates weren't symbols of a foreign land. They were alive. Each one hummed with quiet meaning. Each one whispered a different truth. One by one, as she walked forward, she began to see the words carved into them. Some painfully familiar. Fear, guilt, hurry, comparison, self-doubt. The path had become a mirror. "These are the gates you've walked through every day," Nico said gently. "Not physically, but energetically. Without even knowing, your mind has passed through them again and again. And each one has shaped the way your life unfolds." Alina felt her hands begin to tremble. The weight of those words was real. How many times had she rushed into her morning, with her heart already racing, mind already spinning, expectations already tightening around her like a net? How often had she entered the day through the gate of scarcity, worrying there wouldn't be enough? Time, love, success, peace. "Every gate is a frequency," Nico continued, "and every frequency becomes a pattern. The longer you walk through fear, the more fear becomes home. The more you walk through guilt, the more you forget what freedom feels like." She took a step deeper into the vision. The gates changed. Some were darker, harder to read, etched with words she didn't want to acknowledge. One said, resentment. Another, resignation. She hesitated. "What do I do?" she whispered. "You choose differently," he said. "You turn from default to design." And then, something shifted. The sky seemed to brighten, the path ahead widening. New gates began to appear. Not red this time, but glowing gold. Their inscriptions were gentle but unmistakable. Clarity, compassion, stillness, courage, joy. As she stepped closer to one, she felt her body respond. Her breath deepened, her spine lengthened. The gate wasn't just symbolic, it was a sensation, a memory of a self she hadn't lived in for far too long. "These are the gates you'll walk through now," Nico said. "Not because they're trendy or spiritual, but because they're yours. You're allowed to choose where your energy goes. You always were." The vision began to dissolve, but Alina didn't feel like she was waking up. She felt like she was finally arriving. Back in the park, she opened her eyes, heart pounding. Not with fear, but with an almost unbearable awareness. She felt like someone who had been driving on autopilot for years and was just now realizing her hands were on the wheel. "How do I hold on to this?" she asked softly. "You don't hold," Nico replied. "You return. Every morning. You walk the gates before the world tells you which ones to walk. And slowly, the pattern changes." That afternoon, Alina began a new ritual. Before her coffee, before her email, before she even spoke, she would sit for 5 minutes and walk her gates. Not in her mind, but in her breath. She would inhale and step through presence. Exhale and step through gratitude. Inhale, truth. Exhale, focus. Inhale, compassion. And by the time her feet touched the sidewalk, her energy had already been claimed. Her day hadn't begun with the needs of the world, but with the wisdom of her intention. Over the following days, she noticed subtle shifts. She didn't rush conversations. She didn't react to urgency. She didn't feel like she was catching up to herself. She was meeting herself. Every evening, she opened her journal and wrote down what she called the unseen gates, the ones she hadn't consciously chosen but had slipped through anyway. Impatience, comparison, overwhelm. Instead of blaming herself, she studied them. She traced them back to moments of tension, words that triggered old stories, choices made out of habit instead of awareness. Each discovery didn't shame her, it freed her, because now she had language for the invisible. And with language came power. One night, she created a new practice. On a blank page, she drew 5 archways. Simple, clean, symbolic. She painted them with watercolors, each one a different shade. Then, with deliberate care, she named them. Peace, joy, wisdom, trust, light. She hung the page above her desk, and every morning, instead of opening her phone, she placed her hand over her heart and whispered the name of each gate as if it were an invocation. She began to carry herself differently, not because her job changed, not because her responsibilities shrank, but because she no longer poured her energy into 1,000 invisible drains before noon. She was no longer surviving her days, she was shaping them. She met with Nico once more, 2 weeks later. Same bench, same warmth in his eyes. She didn't need a question this time. She had her own. "Why don't they teach us this?" she asked. "They do," he said softly. "But only in whispers, only in symbols, only in places most people are too busy to look." She nodded. "I almost missed it." "But you didn't," he replied. "And now, the gates will never be invisible to you again." She walked away that evening as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the grass. And yet, she felt lighter than she had in years. Not because her burdens were gone, but because she was finally choosing where to carry her light. If this story unlocked something inside you, if you felt yourself walking through gates you didn't realize were shaping your life, subscribe to the channel now. It keeps these messages alive, and it helps us continue creating a space where truth meets transformation. This is only the beginning. The journey ahead will take us even deeper, into the body, into the current, into the fire waiting to be remembered. Are you ready to walk through? The plane touched down in Arizona just after dusk, but the heat still clung to the air like something sacred. As Alina stepped out of the terminal, she felt it immediately. An odd sensation, subtle but undeniable. It was as if the ground beneath her pulsed with something ancient, something that didn't quite speak, but listened. She hadn't come for vacation. She hadn't come for escape. She had come because something inside her was pulling her toward the silence. After everything Nico had shown her, how her energy was shaped by attention, how her thoughts formed gateways to her reality, she knew the next step wasn't about thinking at all. It was about feeling, and it had to begin in the body. The drive into Sedona was quiet. No music, no conversation. Just the vastness of the desert unfolding before her. The red rock formations rose like old gods against the twilight sky, their shadows stretching across the earth with the kind of reverence that demanded you slow down. By the time she arrived at the cabin Nico had arranged, the stars were already spilling across the sky in silence. The next morning, she met him at the base of Bell Rock. He didn't greet her with words. He simply nodded, turned, and began walking. She followed, her breath shallow, her feet unsure, as if her body hadn't quite caught up with her spirit. The ground was warm, the breeze dry and scented with something mineral, something wild. They climbed without speaking until they reached a flat ridge surrounded by open sky. There, Nico finally stopped. He sat cross-legged and motioned for her to do the same. She lowered herself slowly, the rock beneath her surprisingly smooth, like it had been worn down by more than wind, by ritual, maybe, or memory. "This is where it begins," he said quietly. "I thought it already had," she answered. He shook his head. "Up until now, you've been rethinking your life. Now you're going to feel it." Alina nodded, unsure what that would look like. But she was ready. Or at least, she was willing. Nico guided her into a breathing rhythm. Slow, steady, grounded. He told her to let go of any need to analyze, to explain, to judge. And slowly, something began to happen. Not outside her, but within. At first it was subtle, a tingling in her fingertips, a warmth rising her spine. Then a strange heaviness in her chest, like something long buried had begun to surface. She opened her eyes, startled, but Nico was already watching her. "It's okay," he said gently. "That's just your body remembering." "Remembering what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long it's been ignored." She closed her eyes again. This time, she let the sensations move through her, without resistance. Her breath deepened. Her awareness dropped from her mind into her chest, into her belly, into her feet. It was like descending into a part of herself she'd never met, ancient and unspoken. Tears came without warning, not from pain, not even from sadness, from relief. For the first time in years, she wasn't trying to be anything. She wasn't performing. She wasn't proving. She wasn't holding herself together. She was simply being. And in that stillness, something opened. A memory surfaced, clear and vivid. She was 9 years old, curled up in a closet with her hands over her ears. Her parents were fighting again, voices sharp, full of fire, and she had made a decision, right there in that dark, cramped space. Don't make noise. Don't need anything. Keep the peace by disappearing. That decision had followed her into adulthood, shaping her posture, her tone, her silence. It had wrapped around her energy like invisible wire, keeping her just small enough, just quiet enough to be accepted. And now, here in the middle of the desert, she let that version of herself dissolve. She whispered into the wind, "I'm allowed to be here." Nico guided her through simple movement, nothing choreographed or complex, just breath synced with slow, intentional gestures, raising her arms to the sky with each inhale, lowering them to her heart with each exhale. Step by step, she began to understand. This wasn't exercise, it was integration. She wasn't fixing anything, she was reconnecting. They walked slowly across the ridge in silence, grounding each step with awareness. She began to feel her energy in real time, not as a concept, but as a current. When she focused, it gathered. When she worried, it scattered. When she judged, it closed. When she accepted, it opened. Later that afternoon, Nico handed her a small journal and a pen. But this time, he asked her to write with her left hand, her non-dominant. "Why?" she asked. "Because the truth doesn't live in your practiced answers," he said. "It lives in the part of you that never learned to lie." She sat under a juniper tree and began to write. The words came slowly, clumsily, but they came. "I don't want to be strong all the time. I want to feel soft again. I miss how light I used to be. I am not a task to manage. I'm tired of apologizing for who I am when no one's even asked me to." She stared at the page, hand trembling, but something in her felt lighter. Not empty, clear. That night, she slept deeper than she had in years. In the days that followed, Nico taught her how energy moves through the body, not just spiritually, but physically. He showed her where emotion lives in muscle tension, where truth gets stuck in the throat, where creativity rests in the hips, where joy rises in the chest. He introduced her to the concept of energy centers, not as abstract ideas, but as functional gateways, stability at the root, feeling in the sacral, will in the solar plexus, love in the heart, expression in the throat, clarity in the mind, connection in the crown. Through breath, movement, and presence, she began to feel each one as a part of herself. Not mystical, but mechanical, magnetic, alive. And slowly, she stopped searching for power in the world around her. She found it in her stillness. One morning, she climbed to the top of Cathedral Rock alone. As she stood at the edge, the sun rising before her, she felt something stir in her chest, a warmth that wasn't just physical. It spread outward, through her arms, her spine, her skin. Not adrenaline, not emotion, energy. It didn't surge, it didn't shout, it glowed. And in that glow, she heard a voice, not Nico's, not memories, not even her own. It said simply, "This is what you are." She didn't reply, she didn't need to, because the moment didn't ask for words, it asked for witness. She placed her hand on her heart and closed her eyes. Stillness, and within that stillness, the flame. If this chapter touched something sacred in you, if your body is whispering things your mind has ignored for too long, subscribe to the channel. Let us continue holding space for the parts of you that are not broken, just buried. This journey is not about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you've always been. The next step will take us deeper still, into the mind itself, into the thoughts that shape our world before we even speak them. You're not just reclaiming your energy, you're remembering how to carry fire. Alina had expected the cold. What she hadn't expected was the silence. Lake Louise sat still beneath a ceiling of soft grey clouds, the surrounding peaks wrapped in frost like sleeping giants. The surface of the lake was frozen solid, but there was no harshness to it, just stillness, a kind of sacred, heavy stillness that made her want to whisper, even when she was alone. She came here because something in her told her it was time, not to move, but to look. Sedona had helped her feel again, helped her wake up the body she'd forgotten how to listen to. But now the real work was calling, not from her skin or her breath, but from the thoughts that lived between them. She'd never really known how loud her mind was until it stopped trying to drown itself out. She'd always been thinking, solving, fixing, preparing. Her thoughts had never left her alone. But now that she'd begun to sit with her energy, she realized most of those thoughts weren't hers. They were echoes, old voices replaying, rewinding, layering one over the next like a soundtrack she didn't know she was listening to. And so she came to the lake, alone. No Nico this time, no questions waiting in handwritten ink, just the knowing that she was ready to face the final and most elusive part of her energy, the mind. Her first morning in the cabin, she did nothing but sit. No goals, no meditation techniques, no journal prompts. She wrapped herself in a thick blanket and watched the ice. It didn't move, it didn't rush. And in that stillness, something strange began to happen. She started noticing the shape of her thoughts. They weren't violent, they weren't cruel, but they were constant, subtle, polished, rational. They told her she wasn't ready, that maybe this peace she was chasing wasn't practical, that the world didn't reward people who slowed down, that she'd fall behind, that people would forget her, that she would disappear. And every time she heard one, she would whisper gently, "Whose voice is that?" Sometimes it sounded like her mother, always pushing for excellence. Sometimes it was a boss she once admired, who measured value by deadlines. Sometimes it was society itself, filtered through years of conditioning. Be likable, be fast, be productive, be useful. She began to realize that her thoughts had never truly been her own. They were borrowed, shaped, reinforced, and repeated. But now, for the first time, she wasn't merging with them. She was observing, and what she saw broke her open. She started to see her mind not as the enemy, but as a mirror. A perfectly faithful mirror, reflecting whatever she pointed it at, consciously or unconsciously. If she fed it fear, it would reflect scarcity. If she fed it self-doubt, it would reflect limitation. And if she began feeding it clarity, it would reflect light. One evening, she lit a candle on the wooden table by the window. She sat in silence and imagined her mind as a vast room, tall and echoing, with walls lined in glass. And she asked herself a question she hadn't dared to before. If my thoughts create the architecture of my reality, what kind of home have I been living in? The answer came quickly. A home with too many doors open. A house with no locks on the gates. A space where anyone's fear could enter. Where shame echoed through the halls louder than truth. Where the lights flickered every time she questioned her worth. So she began to rebuild. Not with force, but with focus. Each day, she chose one thought to hold with full attention. Just one. Not an affirmation. Those had always felt like pretending. But a truth. One she had earned. I am safe in my slowness. I am not behind. I can think clearly without needing permission. She repeated it like a mantra, not to convince herself, but to root herself. And she began to build what Nico had once called a mental altar, a sacred place in her mind where she could return any time the noise began to rise. A place not made of stone or ritual, but of intention. She pictured it as a quiet room overlooking the lake. In the center, a glowing orb of light. This was her focus, and every time her thoughts began to spiral, she would close her eyes, return to the room, and sit beside the light. Nothing else. Just sit. In time, the spiraling slowed. The narrative softened. Her mind didn't become quiet overnight, but it became hers. One morning, she walked across the frozen lake. The sky was pale, the ice beneath her cracking faintly underfoot, like it was exhaling. She stopped in the center and looked down. Her reflection was faint, blurred by layers of ice and snow. But the metaphor wasn't lost on her. The mind is like water, she thought. When agitated, it distorts everything. But when still, it reflects the truth. She sat down right there on the ice and placed both hands flat against it. The cold shocked her at first, but she didn't pull away. She wanted to remember this moment, this stillness, this clarity. She wanted to remember that the thoughts she used to run from could be met, witnessed, chosen. That night she wrote in her journal, not from fear, but from mastery. Not because she was healed, but because she had learned to see. I am not my first thought. I am the space that chooses the next one. I am not a victim of my mind. I am its artist. My focus is not weak. It was simply never trained. And then, in a kind of closing prayer, she wrote, I now design the room where my thoughts live, and I only furnish it with what brings peace. The next day, she began a new habit. Before she reached for her phone, before she poured her coffee, she asked herself, what thought will I choose to feed today? She didn't always get it right. Some days she defaulted to stress, to scarcity, to old fears. But now she noticed. And in that noticing, she reclaimed her power. On her final morning, she stood again at the edge of the lake. The wind was gentle, and the world felt full. She didn't need a sign. She didn't need to meditate. She simply stood there, breathing, watching the frozen world reflect her unfrozen self. She had spent most of her life being shaped by her thoughts. Now she was shaping them. And what she understood in that moment was this: energy flows through thought. Thought shapes belief. Belief becomes behavior, and behavior builds reality. You do not need to silence the mind to find peace. You only need to learn how to direct it. With gentleness, with clarity, with care. If these words reflected something inside you, if you saw a little more the home your thoughts have built, subscribe to the channel. This is how we stay connected. This is how we continue building, not just awareness, but mastery. Because the journey isn't about eliminating thought. It's about making sure your energy no longer bows to a voice that doesn't belong to you. The next and final part will be the return, the integration, the fire fully remembered. Let's walk there together. The city hadn't changed. The sirens still echoed off glass buildings. The subways still rattled beneath impatient feet. The people still moved quickly, eyes forward, minds elsewhere. But Alina was no longer part of the rush. When she stepped off the plane and back into the pulse of New York, it felt like she was entering a world she had once belonged to but no longer lived in. Everything was familiar. The skyline, the rhythm, the noise, but none of it had power over her anymore. She wasn't returning to her old life. She was bringing her new self home. She had no grand plan, no dramatic declaration, no checklist of how to integrate what she had learned. What she had was something quieter, deeper, more unshakable. Presence. Not the kind that needs to be announced, the kind that shifts the atmosphere without a word, the kind that fills a space simply by arriving without rushing to explain why it's there. Her apartment looked the same, but her energy filled it differently. She didn't feel like she needed to fix anything. She didn't rearrange the furniture, or toss her old clothes, or change the paint. The transformation wasn't in what surrounded her. It was in the way she inhabited the space. Her stillness moved through it like incense, slow, intentional, sacred. She began each day the same way she had in the mountains and by the lake. She breathed. She chose her gates. She walked through her thoughts like paths she had paved herself. But the difference now was that the world pushed back. Work deadlines came faster. People expected the old version of her to pick up where she left off. There were temptations to prove herself again, to perform, to produce on demand. But she didn't move from pressure anymore. She moved from alignment. Her first real test came in the form of an email. A major project she had always dreamed of leading was being offered to her, but with impossible expectations, a tight deadline, and a team that had a reputation for burnout. The old Alina would have said yes in a heartbeat. She would have sacrificed sleep, cancelled plans, and poured herself into it just to prove she could. But the new Alina paused. She sat with the decision. She placed it on her mental altar. She asked herself not what would impress people, but what would honor her energy. And the answer was no. She declined with grace, suggesting someone else she trusted to take it on. Then she went for a walk in the park and let the silence celebrate her choice. She didn't feel guilt. She felt powerful. Not because she had said no to the world, but because she had said yes to herself. It wasn't about rejecting ambition. It was about redefining it. Her success no longer depended on how much she could carry. It depended on how intentionally she chose what to hold. A few days later, a friend from her old life reached out. Jess, always buzzing, always busy, always on the edge of burnout, asked if they could meet. They sat in a quiet corner cafe, and Alina listened as Jess poured out the weight she had been carrying, the exhaustion, the endless race, the fear of stopping. Jess looked at her through tired eyes and asked, "How did you slow down without falling apart?" Alina didn't give advice. She didn't list steps or techniques. She just asked a single question, the same one that had started everything. "Where is your energy going, and who decided that?" Jess sat back, stunned into silence. Alina watched as something cracked open in her friend's face. Not pain, but realization. That was the beginning for Jess. Not a transformation, a remembering. And that's when Alina understood something profound. The journey she had taken wasn't just for her. It was for everyone she would meet. She wasn't a teacher. She wasn't a guide. She was a reflection, a mirror for those who were still in the noise, still in the race, still waiting for permission to stop running. She didn't need to preach. She didn't need to convince. Her presence was the invitation. Her calm was the message. She became magnetic without trying. One evening, she was invited to speak on a small panel about conscious leadership. It wasn't something she sought out. Someone had recommended her, saying simply, "There's something about the way she moves." When she spoke, she didn't share strategies. She shared stillness. She told the story of the gates she walked through each morning. She talked about how presence wasn't a luxury. It was the foundation of real power. And afterward, people came up to her not to praise her words, but to thank her for making them feel something they hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. She wasn't becoming someone new. She was becoming fully herself. And the more she lived in alignment, the more life met her there. Things began to shift around her, not dramatically, but with precision. Opportunities came not because she chased them, but because she was ready. Relationships deepened because she no longer showed up half-present. Decisions came easier because she knew what it felt like to be grounded. She no longer asked if she was doing enough. She asked, "Is this choice an extension of who I truly am?" And if the answer wasn't yes, she let it pass. On the first anniversary of her first conversation with Nico, she traveled again, this time to the Grand Canyon. Alone, no journal, no plans, just the desert and her breath. She stood at the edge of the south rim as the sun set, casting the canyon in layers of gold and shadow. The wind wrapped around her, soft and cool. She closed her eyes and placed her hand on her chest. And in that stillness, she didn't feel small. She felt eternal. She whispered into the open sky, not as a statement, but as a return. "I remember now. I am the flame." She wasn't the fire searching for kindling. She was the spark that had always been there, waiting for permission to burn. And now, she didn't need permission. She walked back from the edge slowly, not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to carry the moment with her, gently, fully, completely. That night, as stars spilled overhead like stories waiting to be told, she wrote one final entry in the back of her journal. "I do not chase. I attract through alignment. I do not react. I respond from clarity. I do not seek energy. I become it. Every thought, every breath, every choice is a ripple. I move not from force, but from flame." If this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you of the part of yourself you once abandoned to survive, subscribe to the channel. This is how we stay connected. This is how we honor the flame in each other. Because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs people who remember who they are beneath the noise. It needs people like you. People who don't just awaken, but embody. This is the return. Not to where you were, but to who you've always been. And once you live from that place, nothing will ever be the same again.